Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 4 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Chicago Blackhawks and lost by a score of 4-2. Over the first 3 games of this season, the Sharks have been in the habit of trying to find some of the positives over each of these games. Game 1, they had a 4-1 lead in the first 40 minutes and going into the third period against the St. Louis Blues. Game 2, many would say that the Sharks were the better team that night, just not quite getting the bounces to actually get the win. And then in Game 3, just a couple of days ago, the Sharks did a very good job of holding their own against a very, very strong Dallas Stars Stanley Cup contender team, going all the way to the shootout before dropping off there. Here tonight, however, in this game against Chicago, I'm not sure the coaching staff will be able to do that same exercise because there really isn't a lot of positives to take out of this one from a team sense. You could say that the Sharks were better in the third period. They finished this game off strongly, but one has to consider just how much score effects may have played a role in that. How much was it just Chicago letting their foot off the gas a little bit in a game that they were quite firmly in control of? And it certainly doesn't do anything to redeem the terrible first period that the Sharks started this game with. A first period so bad that it's actually competitive for the worst period of the season thus far, and that's in a year in which includes a 3-goal blown lead in the third period in Game 1 against the St. Louis Blues. The fact that that is even remotely close is quite telling of just how bad this opening 20 minutes of this game was. And what makes it even worse is that this should have been a competitive matchup for San Jose. With how bad this team was last year, the Chicago Blackhawks only finished 5 points above them in the standings. So this was a team that was on the Sharks' level, and yet they still ended up getting pummeled in the first 30 minutes of this and did not have enough in the tank to catch up in the final 30 minutes. Like I said, the first period was quite bad for the Sharks. They gave up the first goal, in fact the first 2 goals in that opening frame, including their first power play goal against this season, though not their last, because it would immediately be followed up with yet another power play goal to open up the second period for a Chicago 3-0 lead. Not surprising that Chicago would score 2 power play goals when the Sharks were basically gift wrapping them power play after power play after power play with 7 minor penalties. In fact, not just that, but 2 sets of those minor penalties were in such quick succession to give Chicago 2 different 5-on-3 chances. That is just unacceptable and way too undisciplined, something that the Sharks clearly need to work on over these first 4 games of the season because they have been so immensely undisciplined thus far, and that cannot just fully rely on a penalty kill that admittedly has been really, really good prior to this game, but when you're going to give players like Connor Bedard a chance over and over again with all that open ice, you're bound to get burned, and indeed that's what ended up happening. Tyler Toffoli would end up getting a goal here to stem the bleeding a little bit in the second period, but that would be the score at the end of 2 periods. 3-1 Chicago. In the third, like I said, the Sharks were better, but in fact it would be the Blackhawks who would score the first of that one. Dickinson makes it 4-1 before it is Zetterlund a few moments later who would bring it back to within 2. But that would be the scoring for the rest of the game. Nothing else doing. The Sharks would actually have 3.5 minutes of 6-on-5 time with the goaltender pulled, and yet didn't really get even that great of a chance on net to bring this to within 1. So their losing streak to open this season gets extended to 4. If we take a look at the roster for tonight's game, it is once again identical to the previous one against Dallas, which means this is identical to the previous one before that against the Anaheim Ducks, with really only the goaltender swapping in and out. And so we must get to our regular scheduled programming of complaining about why Danil Gushchin is not in the lineup yet again. After leading the preseason in terms of points, he got a single chance on the 4th line in Game 1 against the St. Louis Blues, where he wasn't the best player on the Sharks, but he certainly was one of their better ones, winning some good battles, but was only given 10.5 minutes in that game and has been a healthy scratch ever since, which is honestly just somewhat inexplicable, especially since the Sharks have severely struggled to actually put up goals in every single one of these games. At even strength, I've talked about how it is really just the first line who's carrying the brunt of the scoring for the San Jose Sharks, and today's game was no different. First one scored by Tyler Toffoli, and the second one you might bring up, oh, but that's Zetterlund, a second liner. Is that actually the second line contributing? Nope, because Zetterlund was the extra forward in a 6-on-5 delayed penalty situation. He was on the ice with Granlund and Eklund, so I would call that a first line goal. It's not as though the rest of the team has been getting 0 chances on net. It's just that it is not nearly consistent enough, and there's just not enough offense talent in the rest of the lineup to actually be able to get these goals. And so you're putting so much of the burden on these top 3 players. You can't really honestly expect more than like 2, maybe 3 goals per night, and with a defensive core that's really not the best in the league, and goaltenders who have been up and down thus far through the preseason and regular season, it's not a recipe to win games. So Daniil Gushchin should be on the inside of the lineup as soon as possible. You're just immediately into next game, and I imagine he probably will be for that one. But let us indeed talk about now the players who did play, and the top line for the Sharks was pretty good, I would say. It wasn't always consistent. They struggled immensely in the first period, for sure, pretty much like the rest of the team did, but they certainly brought it back as the game wore on. They were clearly the best line in the final 2 periods of this one, periods 2 and 3, getting tons of very good chances for themselves. They were dominant at times in the offensive zone, which was quite nice to see. We'll start off with Mikael Granlund, who continues to show off his skill, his patience. There's not really a lot more praise that you can actually give to Mikael Granlund. What I do find to be very interesting is that one of the criticisms that I give to these young players, including and primarily Will Smith thus far this season, is that they need to learn how to actually make do with very little time that they have, because in the NHL there's always that next player who's closing in on you. But what Granlund has been able to do as a seasoned veteran who has been in the league for many, many years at this point is that he's able to create that time for himself. You'll notice the ability to be patient with the puck. Granlund is able to stand still almost in areas for 2-3 seconds, because he's able to put himself in these positions where it is dangerous for teams to actually press and pressure him, because he's able to burn them with his passing ability. Players like Will Smith need to be able to learn as time goes on how to do that, kind of like what Eklund had to do when he first came into the NHL. So Granlund continues to be very impressive to watch. It wasn't a consistent thing all throughout this game, but when he was on, he was absolutely on. The same would go for his 2 teammates here tonight. William Eklund, I thought after a first 3 games that were good but not great, I think he is beginning to find himself here. He had a few really, really dominant shifts where puck possession-wise, he actually had one of the few good shifts of any player in the entire first period for himself, where he was able to hold onto the puck long enough before he ended up drawing a penalty in that shift. So that was quite nice to see for himself. He set up a very nice goal onto the Tyler Toffoli one, not like the most impressive of passes, but the fact that he was able to work it into that situation was nice to see. So he picks up a couple of points here tonight as Eklund is hopefully beginning to wake up a little bit. Like I said, with the Sharks relying heavily on their top line for offense, they really need him to do that. And then Tyler Toffoli, like I said, his 3rd of the season already in just 4 games. He is a scorer through and through, and you can see just how good he is in that area, where on his goal, it seems like just a very easy tap in, but his ability to actually take his space near the crease in front of the net and not be and sort of become like this unmovable object where defensemen are unable to really push him out of that area is so valuable, and something that other lesser players, so to speak, are not able to do as consistently. But Toffoli has that strength, has that ability to pull that off, and that's why he's able to get this goal. So it looks relatively minor and more so a play that is an easy tap in for himself, but still quite good, and so a solid game for Toffoli for sure. Moving on to the second line, this is where we actually had our only lineup swap, not in terms of personnel. Gushchin doesn't step into the lineup, but we do see Smith drop from the second line to the third and is swapped out for Alex Wennberg. I've talked about in the past that Wennberg isn't really given a chance to show off his offensive prowess on a line with Cunnin and Goodrow. Neither of those players are particularly great shooters. Here with Kostin and Zetterlund, one might think that he might be able to step up for San Jose, and while his defensive game was okay at times here tonight, still, like it has been all season, offensively he didn't really do much. There were a couple of passes to Zetterlund, and then Zetterlund ended up just doing his patented miss of the net on the shot, which I guess is, something positive, and it was slightly better than what we have seen from the second line thus far this season when Smith was in this position, but nowhere near where the Sharks need their other top six line to actually be. It was not good for San Jose through most of the night. But I wouldn't even put that much blame onto Wennberg for that, because another very obvious culprit here is Klim Kostin, who inexplicably manages to hold onto a lineup spot yet again. I mean, I guess his spectacular performance the other night against the Dallas Stars, where he had a team low of ice time of 10 minutes and 1 second, where he rewarded Rosovsky with an overtime shift in which he took a penalty to put the Sharks down a man for the last 40 seconds. Somehow, some way, even with all of these mistakes that he has been making, he manages to get yet another game on the second line, boggles the mind. And yet, once again, Kostin was perhaps the Sharks' worst forward of the night. I don't even think that there's that much of an argument about that. This second line, because of him, there were multiple moments where he had the right idea, I would say, where he could put his pass, but it was just the execution that was so far off, and it instead just led to giveaway in the offensive zone, which just could put a complete end to the Sharks' offensive chances. I'm not going to say that the reason this second line was bad is solely on the shoulders of Klim Kostin, but he definitely did not help, and he hurt it a good bit more. When it comes to the other player on this line, Fabian Zetterlund, he scores a goal, which is nice to see. It's in a 6-on-5 situation, him playing on that first line. His other goal this season is also on the power play. At even strength, he hasn't really been able to find much of anything. Of course, the excuse was there, in which Will Smith really wasn't doing him many favors in those first few games, but now playing with at least a slightly better center, or at least a center who's more used to the NHL pace, like Alex Wennberg, maybe you were hoping for a bit more of a step up. That didn't really end up happening for Zetterlund. It's an interesting spot because Zetterlund, when he first was acquired by the Sharks, was really bad in those first 20 or so games near the end of that season. Then this past year, he managed to be the leading scorer for them in terms of goals with 24. However, it needs to be pointed out that when a team is really, really bad, like the Sharks were last season, someone still has to score goals, right? The team is likely still going to average around 2 goals per game. That's 164 goals over a full season. So someone's going to be putting up 15 to 20 goals. And that ended up being Zetterlund last year. And so this season, with the Sharks having the improvements at forward that they did, it was going to be the true test of what the Sharks actually have in Zetterlund. Is he that top 6 player, or is he more of a third liner? And right now, you're maybe leaning more towards that third line, who is able to pop in the opportunistic goal in an advantage situation like he has done this season. When it comes to the third line, we have Smith with Cunnin and Goodrow. Now, if you had told me a month ago that Smith would be put on a line with Cunnin and Goodrow, I would have been kicking and screaming, calling for Warsofsky's firing, because how could they possibly put one of the most skilled prospects that the Sharks have with two of the least skilled forwards that they do have? But now, a month into the season, or a month later, and a few games into the season, I actually don't hate this lineup choice, and even more so, I actually think it was a good move by Warsofsky. Clearly, Smith, it was not working out on that second line. There was no play driver there. Kostin's clearly not going to do it. Smith isn't ready to do it. Zetterlund is definitely not going to do it either. And so that second line was just a complete lost cause. Getting put here onto this third line, sure, it's not a third line that is going to have two players that are really going to be able to make use of that playmaking ability that Smith has, but really that hasn't been on full display thus far this season. We just need to actually get Smith into a decent game, and putting him with two strong forecheckers who will be able to open up the ice a little bit for him, like Goodrow and Cunnin, I think is actually a good move, and it does lead to Smith's best game of the entire season by a pretty significant margin. Now, that's not saying much, because over the first 3 games, Smith was quite bad, so it doesn't take much to actually get an improvement from that. But if those first 3 games are 3-on-10 performances, here tonight I would say it's a 5-on-10, maybe even a 6-on-10. He was one of the Sharks' better forwards. In fact, he was probably one of their best, maybe even their best in the first period of tonight's game. He got a good amount of ice time in that first period as well, got a ton of time in the 6-on-5 situation at the end of this game. And so while he, of course, still didn't get a goal or a point or anything like that, it is hopefully one of those ones that Warsofsky will talk to him, say, you played a good one, and maybe start to begin to build some level of confidence. I wouldn't be surprised to see him actually in the same exact position next game tomorrow against Winnipeg, still with Cunnin and Goodrow, and I still wouldn't be upset about that decision, because I think, surprise, surprise, it actually works rather well. In the fourth line now, we have Grundstrom, Sturm, and Dellandrea. They were kept together for this game because they were so fantastic in the previous one against Dallas, and their performance dropped off a cliff completely. They had one shift as a line in which they were actually pretty decent and got a good breakout and got a decent chance on net. That was in the second period. Otherwise, Grundstrom was pretty much invisible. Dellandrea did get a promotion near the end of the game, a swap with Klim Kostin, but that was much more of a comment on Kostin's game, which was quite bad up to that point, compared to Dellandrea's game that was also rather invisible, but at least he had a decent finish to the game. And then Nico Sturm, who had been really good over the first 3 this season, probably his worst of the season for sure. So some lineup changes definitely need to be done here. The Sharks cannot yet again go with another same exact forward group. They need improvements of offense, and Danil Gushin is literally right there waiting. On the defensive side of things, we have the top pairing of Walman and Ceci. Ceci, for the first time this season, did not impress me. I thought this was definitely by far Ceci's worst game of the year. I wouldn't say he was absolutely terrible, garbage, no redeeming qualities, but there were a lot of mistakes, a lot of really bad turnovers in his own zone, uncharacteristic compared to what we had seen in the first 3 games. We also very much didn't see any jumping into the play from Ceci pretty much this game, which is maybe sort of related to the fact that he wasn't on point tonight. So not a great game from Ceci, but I'm certainly forgiving of that considering he had started this year off quite strong for San Jose. His defensive partner Walman I thought was a good bit better, struggled a bit because Ceci wasn't looking all that great, but still, while not his best game of the year, solid enough, I would say, for Walman. On the second pairing, Ferraro and Ruda, this is a pairing in which you don't really have much of a puck mover. On the first pairing, the Sharks have Walman, who at least has some innate talent in that area. And then on the third pairing, Thrun has been doing better in that particular area as well. But with both Ferraro and Ruda, both of these guys are fully defensive-minded. They're defensive defensemen at the exact definition of it. You look in the dictionary and you see Ferraro, you see Ruda under defensive defenseman. There's really not much else to either of these two players' games. And so really, it just comes down to them banking pucks off of the boards. And when the Sharks aren't playing well like they weren't here tonight, that's where this pairing really ends up struggling. And I thought Ruda, that he ends up taking 2 really undisciplined penalties here tonight. That was not good to see. And defensively, he had some real struggles. His defense on the first goal for Chicago by Taylor Hall was not good. Way too much of a gap, not being able to get his stick onto Hall, who is a skilled player, but not the best of the best that Chicago has to offer. It's not as though he got exposed by Bedard with his speed and skill. And so not a great game for this second pairing. When it comes to the third pairing, I guess this was the slight positive. Why this third pairing was an absolute black hole in the first 3 games for the San Jose Sharks. In particular, Matt Benning was absolutely terrible. Here tonight, he was a decent bit better. Still not great, but the fact that this third pairing was actually better than the second pairing for the Sharks here tonight, I guess, is improvement, it's progress. I still would rather see Benning not actually get into the lineup, be subbed out, give someone else a chance to see if they can actually roll with that spot, because it is quite clear that not only is Benning not playing all that well, but Warsofsky doesn't even have much faith in him to play that well considering the ice time that is being dished out. So there's that. And then with Henry Thrun, we do continue to see those offensive flashes. It's nice there, but at the end of the day, you do want to actually see a complete, more defensive style of game before that offense does come out. And while, like I said with Benning, it was a bit better here tonight, it's still not where it needs to be. And then finally, the goaltender for the Sharks, it is Vitek Vanacek. The Sharks continue to go back and forth. Game 1, it's Blackwood, then Vanacek, then Blackwood, now Vanacek. Tomorrow, since it's back-to-back, it will be Blackwood once again. Vanacek didn't really have much of a chance on, honestly, either of the last 3 goals. The 2 power play ones were just these backdoor plays that the Sharks penalty kill in front of him needed to be able to interrupt at least one of those passes. The Dickinson one, also a really, really tough spot off of a bad CC giveaway. The only goal that he definitely could have had was the Taylor Hall goal. Yes, I mentioned that Ruda didn't defend it very well, but this is still an off-angle shot, not even all that great. Vanacek just not 100% dialed in to be able to make that save, but I still would not blame him for the loss. The Sharks just didn't play particularly well in front of him. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be right back in action for the final game of this road trip, if I'm not mistaken, against the Winnipeg Jets. Now, I mentioned that Chicago was supposed to be a good matchup for San Jose, one of the easier matchups that they're going to have, considering they were the closest team to the Sharks in the standings last year. Meanwhile, the Jets are one of the better teams in the league thus far. They have one of the best goaltenders in the league, so the Sharks, who are already struggling offensively, will have a tough time actually putting up goals in that one. And we shall see if the Sharks finally manage to break out of this losing streak or if it will continue with 5 in a row. Class dismissed.